Hi everyone, my name's Dom, welcome to the channel. Let's go talk about the Justice of Kings. So The Justice of Kings is released on the 22nd of February. It's the debut fantasy novel from author Richard Swan, and it forms book one in his planned trilogy titled The Empire of the Wolf. I've seen a lot of talk about this book, especially on Twitter and Discord, people raving about how good it is and how great a character the main protagonist Von Volt is, so when I saw the opportunity to get a copy through NetGalley, I jumped on it. Now I have to admit, I did kind of think that I might not like this book. With everyone saying how good it is, I just thought it would be typical for me not to enjoy it, and I did say that in, I think it was my January preview video. I didn't not like The Justice of Kings, but I didn't exactly like it either. There were a number of issues that I found with the book that stopped me from outright enjoying it, and I'll get to those later on, but first of all, what's the book itself about? So Sir Conrad von Volt is a travelling magister. He travels from town to town around the Southern Empire, hearing complaints, making judgments, and where applicable, delivering justice as an executioner. Like other members of his Order of Justices, he has a series of powers at his disposal, the first and foremost of those being the Emperor's voice, which is kind of a power to compel people to tell their truth. As well as that though, it can also be used to a degree at least to get people to do the bidding of the justice. This isn't really explored in a lot of detail, but I get the impression that it is very limited, potentially just to simple commands such as stop. So where you've got the kind of traditional stop in the name of the law, this will actually have some proper power behind it rather than just authority. Von Volt and indeed justices as a whole, as an order, are both feared and revered by the citizens of the Empire. Everybody knows that the justices are essentially second to the Emperor himself and that their word is law. So in the story itself, Von Volt and his small team arrive in a provincial town and immediately hear about the recent murder of an aristocrat's wife. Straight away they begin an investigation, but there are various factors in play which will attempt to thwart their quest for answers and for justice. In the background to this, a religious zealot is raising an army, ostensibly for a crusade to further expand the empire. Although he may not want to believe it, Von Volt soon discovers that there is more at stake here than just justice for a murdered lady, and that his very position as undisputed authority may come under attack. So to get one of the main talking points out of the way first off, Von Volt himself is highlighted as being the main character of this story, and it's told in the first person narrative. Rather than it being Von Volt as the narrator of this story, however, that role actually falls to his 19-year-old clerk, Helena. This might seem like an odd decision, but for me I think it works really well and it's the right path for this book to have taken, and there are some events which happen where Von Volt is not actually involved, so we would miss out on the detail of those if he was the narrator of the story instead. The story is told in a similar style to the Farseer in that Helena is, as an older lady, she's recounting the events of her younger life as if she's writing a memoir. In the story itself, there are various points where Von Volt directs her to make meticulous notes for reference later on, which kind of part explains, I guess, how she's able to recount conversations word for word, even though they occurred many years ago. As a character, I quite liked Helena, and I felt that she was definitely a more interesting choice as narrator than Von Volt would have been, not only for those kind of key events that she was there for but Von Volt wasn't, but also because this way we get to see the Emperor's justice through the eyes of somebody else. For the story itself, I also think that describing the powers of the Emperor's justice works best from the eyes of an onlooker. If we were hearing this story from Von Volt's perspective, I don't think that we would have had the same kind of picture of these powers that the Emperor's justice has, and we certainly wouldn't get the feeling of kind of awe when these powers are being used. Helena has been in Von Volt's employ for just a couple of years at the point of this story, and there's a mixed relationship between the two of them, where Helena seems at equal parts afraid of Von Volt and also caring for him. He's like a father figure to her, and although sometimes she wants nothing more than to be away from his presence, she also finds herself wanting his love, his attention, and his respect. For Von Volt's part, his character is one of the downsides of the story for me actually. I didn't really like him at all. I thought that the concept overall of the travelling magisters and these magical powers that they have was a good one. It was definitely something that really interested me. But the character of Von Volt I found to be a bit dull, a bit petulant now and again, and a bit wooden at times as well. He too often comes across as a stuffy official rather than this kind of awesome figure of authority dispensing justice with clever words and a skilled blade. There are a handful of other characters worth noting as well, but the main one that stands out for me is the third member of Von Volt's party, who is the taskman called Bressinger. Bressinger has an interesting relationship with Von Volt, where they served together in the war, but also with Helena, who he's very protective of, and that leads to some nice character moments within the story. He's a class swordsman as well, and unlike Von Volt, who barely uses his blade, even though we're told that he's a master swordsman, Bressinger does actually get involved in the action a bit more, and through that we see another dynamic to his character. Moving on to the world, and this is another aspect that I both like and yet don't like, depending on how close I'm looking at it. It's clearly a well thought out empire with lots of history which we do see making its way into the story at various points, which adds depth and flavour to the world. And it's also a bit different to the kind of run-of-the-mill medieval fantasy setting, because this one is more Eastern European. This did give me a few little issues here and there where I was tripping over the occasional pronunciation, which just slowed me down as I was reading, but on the whole this isn't a bad thing, and it's nice to see something a little bit different. My first impression of this world, however, was that I just didn't like it. The map in ebooks not very big. I often find this with ebooks, they're difficult to scale up if you can actually zoom in on them at all, but the map itself was split over 2 pages, which obviously on an ebook you can't view side to side. The first side that we did see of the map, I looked at it and immediately was reminded of Wales, the country, not the creature. The second page of the map did take me away from that comparison a little bit, but still my first thought was Wales, and I just couldn't kind of not imagine it as Wales when I was thinking of the map and visualising it in my head. The magic that we see with these powers that the Justices have is quite interesting. I definitely liked that aspect of it, and I like how it's not just kind of a raft of powers. Each individual justice will be different, and it's made clear in the story that however many different powers there are, I don't think we're kind of given the library of them. We don't know exactly how many there are available, but each justice will have just 1 or 2, or in very rare instances 3 of these powers that they can call upon. The Emperor's voice being the main one that we see might seem a little bit obvious for a magister, but it's good that we see the limitations and what it takes out of the user when they call upon the Emperor's voice, so that in this story, for instance, it's not just a case of Von Volt going around and compelling everyone to tell the truth and making a really poor murder mystery of the story. Other powers we're aware of from the story include necromancy, where the justice can kind of have a seance with a recently dead victim or witness or suspect. And there's another one where the justice can commune with animals, so they can use the eyes and ears of nature, or they can pass messages across great distances. For the plot, this is another area that didn't quite do it for me. I found it a bit too slow in too many places. And at the heart of the story, there's a murder mystery that, for me, I don't think it got the care and attention that it deserved. There are other elements that take us away and kind of force us to look at the wider world, but I would have preferred a bit more focus on the crime itself and the investigation of it. I also felt for a murder mystery that there wasn't enough of the kind of traditional detective work of questioning and deducing and gathering of evidence, and there were some things that were just a little bit too convenient. Like occasionally someone would just have a moment of inspiration out of thin air and they'd just say, what if this? And it wouldn't be related necessarily to anything that they'd been talking about. But this revelation, this wild idea, would suddenly blow the case wide open, and it just seemed a bit too easy for me. So the other element that made this story drag for me was a bit too much process. The one genre of movie that I really don't like to watch is a courtroom drama, because I feel that they're too slow and too boring for me, and I prefer to have a little bit of action in there. And at times this story was like having a courtroom drama in a fantasy novel. We spent too long at times going over the actual process of the case and the proceedings themselves, hearing opening remarks and things like that, and it just didn't work very well for me personally. If you have a specific interest in that field, or maybe if you work in litigation like the author does, I can imagine that that would be really interesting and something kind of unique, something you don't come across too often, but it just didn't do it for me. So all of those elements together led me to give The Justice of Kings 3.5 stars. I put this on 3 stars as well on Goodreads and other sites where I don't have the half stars available, because I felt that it was closer to a 3-star read than a 4-star read for me, but overall that 3.5 was a good landing point for my rating. In terms of my weighted ratings, for enjoyment then I gave this 14 out of 20. There were parts of it where it definitely picked up, and those, naturally for my kind of taste, the style of book that I like to read, those were the parts where there was a bit more action involved and when things started to get, for my mind, a bit more interesting. Problem that I found was that they were few and far between and they were over too quickly, and then we were back to some of the slower paced, what I feel to be a bit more dull sections of the storytelling. For the world building I gave 16 out of 20 because, as I said earlier on, I felt that it was a well developed world. I felt that the empire itself and what we saw essentially on the map, if you like, was definitely well planned out with a good bit of history to it, and I liked the way that we saw elements of that brought into the story without overloading us with the information. I also really liked these powers and also how they were used throughout the story to kind of drive the story along without saying too much into it. I thought that there were some really good elements to that. The characters I also gave 16 out of 20. As I say, I really liked Helena. I thought her character worked really well and she had some really good moments. Bressinger and some of the other side characters I also quite enjoyed, and I felt that they were a good element to the story as well. But Von Volt himself as kind of the main, not necessarily the main character, the main point of view character, but he was supposed to be the main star of the book really. And for that to work for me, I needed to like him, and I found that I didn't. I would definitely say, having read the book, that he's not the main character. It's Helena as the narrator who is the main character, and in most instances where you get a first person narration, that will be the case. The narrator is the main story, and I was definitely more interested in her, and if I am to read more stories in this world and to carry on with this series, it would be to learn more about Helena, because I'm not really that bothered about learning more about Von Volt. For the plot, I gave it 13 out of 20. I was a bit torn on this one because for me there were two kind of real elements of the plot, and I don't think we got deep enough into either one of them because they were competing against each other. The murder mystery side of it had some good elements to it, but some elements that I felt were left kind of unresolved almost, not in terms of the actual crime itself, but just some of the, as I said earlier, the investigation of it. And this second aspect with the things that are going on in the wider world took us away from the murder mystery a bit too much, but also, like the murder mystery, we didn't get deep enough into it. We kind of almost went into it kind of half-heartedly, partly I guess because Von Volt was a bit blind and deliberately kind of wanted to stay blind to what was going on. He didn't want to believe that things could be different to how he was viewing them. For writing style, I gave 6 out of 10. It was absolutely fine. There were no problems with the writing, but at the same time, it wasn't anything that blew me away. For the pacing, I've given 2 out of 5 because I did feel that far too often the pacing was too slow. This probably wasn't helped by the fact that I was really busy when I was reading this, so I took longer to read the book than I was expecting to. I thought I would have it finished within a day or two at one point, and then that dragged on to a week because my reading time was reduced. But also I felt like that was partly on the story because it was going a little bit too slow and it was dragging a little bit too much, and therefore I wasn't really invested. I wasn't ploughing through it and trying to get to the end because I was enjoying it. I was going along at the slow pace of the story instead. And then for the discretionary category, I've given 1 out of 5 here because the book does have a map, it does have a decent cover. I'm not one of the people who really loves the cover. I know that plenty of people think it is absolutely gorgeous. It's okay for me. It's not amazing, but it's definitely one that I would not mind looking at, as opposed to some of the covers you get where they're instantly forgettable. So if you add all of those together for the Justice of Kings, that gives us a score of 68% and a place on my Hall of Fame in equal 65th. So this isn't a great score, but it's because of those individual elements within the weighted sections that I felt a little bit let down on. Overall, the book was good, but it wasn't great. As I said at the start of the video, it's not that I didn't like it, but I didn't exactly like it either. I can definitely see why a lot of people do like it, and if you don't mind a book with maybe not quite so much action in it, this is definitely a good fantasy recommendation for you. So let me know anyway in the comments down below if you've read this book or if you're looking forward to reading this book. What do you think of what I had to say? Do you agree? Do you disagree? What are you looking forward to when you get to reading this for yourself? As I say, The Justice of Kings is released on the 22nd of February. I think that's maybe the US date. Here in the UK, I think it's the 24th of February, but you'll be able to get your hands on it soon either way. That's me done for today though. Thanks very much for spending some time with me. I'll hopefully see you again soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.